Hello, and welcome to On the Irregular with me, Java Berry, a podcast where I chat to women from all walks of life about their own unique creative journey, how they got here, how their story has shaped their creative work, what they've learned, what has helped them, and where they plan to go from here. It's an irregular journey for so many of us, and I am delighted to offer a platform to share these fascinating stories and wells of wisdom. This week, I'm chatting to artist, adventurer, writer and marine conservationist Katie Tunn. Katie lives her life in companionship with the waters, waking up to the sound of waves on the Isle of Skye, creating stunning artwork inspired by the Hebridean seas, collecting litter and rescuing injured seals along the coastline, and later this year visiting all 82 of Britain's largest islands. In our chat, we touch upon Katie's relationship with her environment, the pros and cons of social media, spontaneity in creativity, the value of sometimes saying no, and her experience on the Channel 4 reality series, Eden, where she and 22 other participants lived for a year in a remote part of Scotland and attempted to build a self-sufficient community. Welcome to episode 6 with the delightful and rather magical Katie Tunn. I know how busy you are. Thank you so much for giving me some time to talk to me about your life and your journey and all the stuff that I know we'll talk about. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for inviting me on. I really appreciate it. And I have all the time in the world to talk to you. It's so lovely to be able to chat.
Oh, lovely. Well, you kind of sent me a bit of a rundown of like your childhood and where you went from, like, because you went to an all-girls school, didn't you?
I did. So my first couple of schools that I went to were mixed state schools. And then from about the age of 13 to sixth form, I went to an all-girls Catholic school, which was very small, very nurturing. And actually, looking back, I'm so blimmin' lucky to go to a place like that. It doesn't exist anymore. And it wasn't focused on grades or anything like that. So it was a really nice little school to go to.
And where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Windsor,
Windsor.
which is a nice town, very kind of average. It's got the castle, it's got some beautiful parks, but your usual kind of English town, hanging out in front of McDonald's, all that kind of stuff. Not very exciting.
Rite of passage, yeah.
Exactly.
And you always knew, didn't you, that like creativity and art was your focus? Because you said you were a very bright but not particularly organised student at school.
Oh yeah, I'm really lucky that being in a really small school, I was able to be seen by teachers. So they kind of pulled me up and demanded homework and all this stuff. I was absolutely disorganised, not very good at homework. But the thing that I was always doing, if I wasn't concentrating in class, I was always drawing or doodling or something like that. So the question of me going into art was never really, it was always a thing I was going to do, which I think I'm quite lucky with, because I look at my cousins and young people now, how you figure out what you're going to do at the age of 16 or whatever for the rest of your life. Just what a choice. So I was really lucky that I didn't really see anything other than art at the time.
And do you come from a creative background?
I don't think I come from a creative background. No, my family, they're interested in art, but no one's really artistic in the normal sense. There's no painters or anything like that, or any makers. So I'm not really sure where it came from.
That's so interesting. It just came so naturally, and then you just went with it, and they were completely supportive of it.
Yeah, my family was so sweet. I think teachers at school and my family, they were all like, "Oh, Kate's the arty one. She's going to be an artist," and that was it. Which was, I mean, potentially you could look at that as being kind of oppressive, but actually it was so easy. It was like, yeah, okay, great, happy to do this. So
that's so lovely. And did you, when you thought about that, like your future as an artist, did you have a kind of an idea of what an artist was, or what you'd be doing as a job? Did you just see yourself painting paintings for people, or did you have a practical idea?
No idea. I think I was the kid who was always called upon to draw the leaflets for the school, I don't know, magazine or whatever, and stuff like that. So I don't think I really saw how a career would shape up. I think that's the kind of naivety of youth. I just thought, okay, I'm just going to be doing art. And, it wasn't until I got to university that I realized that art kind of came under many different guises. But no, it was always going to be something creative, but I just didn't even think about where it would go, which, yeah, didn't think about paying anything, didn't realize that actually art makes no money, but I just didn't think about that when I was younger.
That's so lovely to be so free to just kind of, because it's really weird. I remember from a really young age being very preoccupied about how I was going to make money, and I had ideas of what I wanted. I knew that I always wanted to be a writer and I wanted to be an illustrator, but I was also very conscious that I needed to make a lot of money. And I think it was possibly because we had quite an unstable, because my mum was an artist and my dad was a musician, so our income was unstable. So I don't know why I thought that being a writer and illustrator was going to be any different. But I remember being very conscious of how I was going to be secure, I suppose. So it's lovely that that wasn't kind of even a thought, I guess. Like that
I don't know. I think yours is the lovely way. I mean, it's some kind of joined up thinking, really. I think mine was just kind of naivety more than anything else. And I guess again, a place of privilege, not having to, not considering that I needed to make money. Although sometimes I do look back and I think, why on earth didn't I do this? Or I could be raking it in and driving a nice car and going on holiday all the time. But no, I'm happy with my choices, I think.
Yeah, and yeah, your priorities are so beautiful, like how you live your life. So you then went on to study at St Martin's.
I did, yep. St
Um,
Martin's was again, it was really weird. My mum, when I was quite young, really found this art school and said, "Oh, this is supposed to be the best art school." And really, that was the only one I looked at. So it's
wow.
really, I mean, I don't have that kind of direction or motivation now as an adult, but it was very much like, right, I'm going to be an artist and I'm going to go to this art school. And somehow, thank God, I managed to make it happen.
It
Um,
sounds like you had a lot of fun.
yeah, being a student was amazing. Well, being of student age in central London with an art school in Soho was amazing.
Hmm.
Being an actual student wasn't something that I was very good at, but I think, I mean, you're just a child and you're thrown into living an adult life, and me being quite disorganized and chaotic, I wasn't interested in studying. And at St Martin's, they um they don't really tutor you in a way that some other colleges do. You don't learn a lot. They kind of just give you free rein and say, come back at the end of term and we'll see what you've done. And so for someone like me who was used to being in a small school and being tutored, I went off and partied and didn't work very hard at all. But I'm glad I went, and there's no regrets there.
And you mentioned also army stuff. What
Mhm.
what army stuff were you doing? How was that part of it?
So I remember at how you go to university and you get the freshers week and you go around all the different stalls and they have, they're trying to get you in clubs and societies. And I remember going around and I thought, right, I'll go and join something fun like skiing or horse riding or something like that. And there were some people from the University Officer Training Corps, which is kind of like halfway between cadets and the TA kind of part-time army. And they came up and they said, right, you can do this at weekends, you get paid, you get military training, you do this. And I was like, oh, never done anything like that before. That sounds fun. Might as well go for it. I'm totally unfit, I'm no good. I'm not the kind of person who goes out jogging in the morning or anything like that. But I went for the selection and I got through and blimmin' loved it. But it was subsidized parties and hanging out in the woods and stuff like that. So it was great fun.
Wow, so that was kind of like alongside your art school, you were doing your art school work or whatever, you were also doing all of this. That's so, and did you, because you hadn't come from like a particularly like physical outdoorsy background, like was that something that you'd been interested in growing up or?
No, I've never considered anything military before. And I mean, looking back now, I almost at the end, I almost decided to go to Sandhurst after university and become an officer.
Oh
And
wow.
then yeah, so glad I didn't. But then I started doing army portraiture, which meant that I got to go to all the parties and kind of keep the connections without having to do any of the hard work. But what was quite strange with doing army stuff at university was that for all the army people, I was very, this hippie left-wing artist. And then for all the people at art school, they were like, what, you do army stuff? So you're this like uptight right-wing whatever.
Yeah.
So I kind of didn't really fit into either. But no, it was interesting. And for me, because I didn't have any like structure or discipline or direction at university, I think that's what I found in doing army stuff, that it kind of gave me a bit of focus. So I absolutely trashed my degree by spending all my time drinking or going on trips with army things. But I learned a lot, and it matured me, I guess.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I can really see, because they do feel like such polar opposites in some ways. So that's really interesting what you're saying about how others perceived you in each of these worlds. That's probably quite healthy. I always think that it's like it's healthy to be kind of slightly not out of sync, but just not completely fitting in with your environment sometimes. Because I think, like you said, that it really does mature you, and you get a chance to observe things in a different way.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah, putting yourself out of your comfort. I guess it's out of your echo chamber as well.
Yes.
You haven't got people saying the same things to you.
Yeah.
And I absolutely adore my friends who are still in the military, but many of them, not all of them, but many of them all have a very kind of homogenized view of things, and it doesn't kind of align with my values.
Mm-hmm.
So it's quite interesting. I'm quite glad that I actually didn't get involved in that way. And I almost feel the same about some people in the art world, that some of it can be quite, there's quite a lot of egos involved and a little bit of snobbery involved. So I'm actually quite pleased to be able to not be right in the middle of it and be part of everything that I see, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, completely. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think, yeah, it can really stop you from getting just a bit too lost or caught up in it, and keep some kind of perspective on it, I guess, for your
Definitely.
sanity.
And there's the quote which I love, and it's something, I can't remember it exactly, but it's something like, there's nothing so dangerous as an artist because they can move between all different sections of society, which I think is quite an interesting quote. I think of it often because I think it gives you a fluidity to go into all different areas, and you see kind of, you can go into a big country house and help with portraits and things like that, or you can go to, I don't know, some kind of warehouse rave or something and help with their graffiti work, or
Yeah.
it's quite interesting in terms of its fluidity.
Yes, you can be a chameleon in some ways. Yeah, I've never heard that. That makes so much sense. And so when you came out of uni, like you said, so you started doing portraits then through your army connections,
Mhm.
and then you also, is it of horses through polo?
Yep. So I came out of university and I was already doing a little bit of polo work because I grew up in Windsor. It's a very horsey area,
Mm.
and I just had the connections to do certain work. So it was the connections to do army portraiture, and it was the connections to do polo work. And also, generally these are areas where people have a bit of money to spend. A lot of the young army officers, they have wealthy parents who want a picture of their son in their new uniform, or a polo pony owner wants the picture of their new horse. And I mean, I absolutely love drawing horses, especially things like polo ponies, because of their muscle structure. I just think it's just the most amazing anatomy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I went into that, which is quite interesting. It's quite hard work because you're not being very creative. You're just kind of recreating what's in front of you, or it was for me anyway. And especially with commissions, you're trying to make someone happy and make someone feel good about the image in front of them.
Yeah.
So it was quite a lot of pressure, especially for someone who's only just come out of university. And it's actually, now I'm older, I think, blimey, that was a lot of pressure, and you did just worry the whole time.
Yeah.
But with a lot of the portraits, it's quite funny. As long as you make someone a little bit taller, a bit slimmer and potentially a bit more chiseled. They're always very happy with their portraits.
And so because this is all very inland, and I'm really intrigued as well, like how did you then, because so much of your work as well as marine conservation and everything that you do in that area, how did that start to feed into your life?
The marine conservation thing is strange. It's so separate from what I did at uni, but I've always constantly been fascinated by the sea ever since I was a child. Like my grandmother always kind of laments about how whenever we went anywhere with an aquarium, I always made her go to an aquarium as a child, and she just is sick of them. Which I didn't know at the time, obviously. But I don't know, I've always been fascinated by the sea. And then in my 20s, I started getting into campaigning about kind of marine plastics, and sharks in particular is something that I'm really passionate about. And I started to do some kind of conceptual paintings about shark finning and things like that. And I thought it was really interesting in London because I think you feel very removed from the sea, and yet what you do still has an impact on the ocean. London is on the Thames, and a cigarette butt that you throw in the Thames will end up in the ocean. So I was really interested in marine conservation whilst I was in London during my 20s. And then I think I got to the point where I thought, well, if that's something I really love, why aren't I closer to it? And it sounds very soppy and a bit cheesy, but I think one of the things to do in life, if you're privileged enough to be able to, is to find what you love and then get close to it, as to be near it or to be in it. And so that's kind of what led me to island life, really.
Wow. So how did you make your way up to Skye? Did you always know that you wanted to be in Skye? Because how long have you been there now?
I think I've been in Skye for about 7 years now, so time flies. It's mad. It's funny, actually, going back to the army thing. I first spent time in the Highlands for something which is called MAC Task, which is a military thing, and it's called Military Aid to the Civilian Community. And what they did was they took us to an estate near Glenlivet, and we were building bridges and fixing fences and putting together a children's play park. And I remember being there and just thinking, this is the most extraordinary landscape. This is so beautiful. And we'd stop for lunch and we'd sit down by the river, in the middle of Speyside, and it was just stunning. And that kind of always stayed with me. So I tried to get up to the Highlands as often as possible. And then I ended up spending a month kind of traveling around the Highlands and Islands, and got home. And this was in my late 20s. I just thought, what am I doing in London? I'm stressed. It costs so much money. All the things I love somewhere else, apart from my family, of course, my family and friends. So I thought, right, well, I might just go and stay up there for 6 months, find somewhere to stay, just hibernate for a winter, somewhere where I'm less stressed and I can get some time out, clear my head, do some writing. And I just never came back.
Wow. Wow, and it's really beautiful how it feels like you've really managed to pull in all the things that you love and find interesting, like the sea and island life, with your work as an artist as well. It feels very, it all feels very, how to say it, integrated and interwoven, I think was the word.
I'm incredibly lucky to be able to kind of follow just what I love. I think, there's a kind of a selfishness that you have when you don't have a children or you don't have a partner. And you can just say, right, I'm upping sticks and I'm going somewhere. You haven't got those ties. And I think that's an incredibly lucky thing. But what made me want to go up and spend that supposed 6 months in Skye was I'd just come out of a relationship, and my mum was in a relationship, and my family and myself were happy and healthy. So I thought, right, if I don't go now, I'll never get the chance because I'll get tied down by something again. So I think I was incredibly lucky, and it's almost quite selfish to be able to do that. But at the same time, I think if you see a chance, you've got to take it quickly because you don't know when that might happen again.
Yeah, that's interesting that you describe it as selfish. What is it that, how do you think, do you mean that in the way it impacts others that they can't be near you, or?
I think it's just it's quite indulgent, I guess. Perhaps not selfish that much, but now I look at my family and I do think, I do miss being with them and being here to help them, especially as people are getting older. But I guess it's an indulgence to be able to follow what you love or follow your passion or, go somewhere just completely at the whim of your own happiness. I guess it's quite a rare thing to be able to do that or to have the space to do that.
Yeah,
But I think it is indulgent. I guess even like hedonistic in a way, in a very gentle way, because
yeah,
it's all about satisfying yourself, I guess.
yeah. And I think the thing is, when you describe it, I just think, well, surely that's the point of life. If you can, I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? Because the fact that were so clear on what it was that you wanted, like I love that that you described it as finding what you love and then getting as close to it as you can, and you knew what that was and you followed it. Is it any different to you know to that being a person or having a family? It's like that's what you wanted to be near, and that's a relationship that you have with your environment, and that's core to your life. So I think it just sounds completely natural, and yeah, of course, why wouldn't you?
It's interesting that you kind of describe it as a relationship because I think um, it's almost been at the expense of relationships with humans, but I do see it as a relationship. It's almost like because I mean I haven't really got a dating life in Skye, but I love being with the environment and being with the ocean and being with the place. So it's interesting that you describe it as a relationship because that's also how I kind of look at it.
Yeah, yeah, I really see that very clearly, and because and it's so part of you, and I've been at your beautiful home, and it just feels like an extension of you and the sea and the sky, and it's really magical. I can't.
I- I'm
Yeah.
so pleased that you went to the house that I live in now because I would really hope that the house that I was in a couple of years ago wouldn't be an extension of me with all the black mold and the soggy carpets and the pervading smell of damp. Thank goodness.
God, and you're saying about, because I can imagine island life because it's quite remote, and does it feel isolating ever?
I think what's interesting, and I think a lot of people will say this about island life or small community rural life, is that it's less isolating than being in a city. I remember when I got there, I started work as a gallery assistant in a gallery in Portree, and I remember my boss telling me um, about her mother feeling like if something ever happened to her, people would notice. Like she could not go to the post office for a week, and someone would say, "Oh, where is she? We should go and check on her." And I think that's really lovely with island life. People notice whether you're okay or not. People always checking on you. I mean, I can't go for a dog walk without stopping for like five different chats for 10 minutes. You can't go anywhere without stopping for a chat. People see you, and I think that's really lovely. You're not isolated at all in terms of community. But then again, that's something which I love, but I also kind of partly hate. What I love about London is you get a kind of anonymity. No one knows who you are. No one stares at you if you're wearing something unusual or something like that. And you've got no anonymity or privacy in a small rural community. But it has its ups and downs. People look out for you at the same time. So it's a bit of both, really.
Yeah. No, as soon as you described that, I thought actually that could be quite oppressive in some ways. If you weren't feeling that you wanted to be able didn't feel like talking to somebody, or yeah, that makes sense actually. It's probably similar to that here, in which is it's an old mill town, but same, you've kind of always got to allow 10, 15 extra minutes whatever you're going to do, because you're going to bump into somebody and have a chat about something, which is lovely. And especially when we first moved here, coming from Manchester, and I had Griffin, who was only 1, and I felt so lonely. And I just like would spend my days walking around the park with him in the pram, and then came here and suddenly people were like saying hello on the street and just chatting to me because I had a little boy. I guess similar to if you've got a dog, you know, you've got like a smaller figure next to you and people just for some reason open up a bit more. And that was really lovely actually. So yeah, that does make sense about you.
Yeah, it's such a treat to be seen, I think. But
Yeah.
then also there's a luxury in anonymity. I guess it depends where, you know, you where you walk or where you go, you can kind of keep yourself to yourself a little bit more. But I find it funny being a single woman. I've got lots of guy friends, kind of totally platonic guy friends, but if I used to have them over to stay at my house, and I'd say to my neighbour, I'd be like, oh yeah, I've just got my cousin coming round or something like that. So they weren't questioning how many male friends I had to come and stay with me, which is ridiculous really, because they're probably not judging, but you're just very aware, especially with slightly more religious people.
Yeah,
And
it must be impossible to have an extramarital affair.
right? I mean, it's quite good in a way, I guess, but
Everyone's keeping tabs on everyone.
I mean, one of the things that I find really weird is, I mean, I live you've seen where I live, you know, I live in a little kind of township on the sea, and it's quite rural, but if I get home from, say, being away for a week or something, I'll have a neighbour call and say, oh, I saw you got home yesterday, I'll pop by tomorrow for a coffee. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, like it's great, but you know, everyone knows everyone's cars. It's like, okay, well, you're in today. I'll pop over, which is quite. I mean, for someone like me, I do everything I can to be on my own. But actually, it's probably quite healthy to be forced into being sociable.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. And that's the great thing about being a creative in all those senses, that it isn't just focused on a canvas or a piece of wood, or, you know, it's how you live your life. And when we went to the Shants, when you took us, was it 11 of us to the Chantiles, and it was very much about you showing us your experience of being there, and it became an incredibly creatively fertile time. You know, people were building furniture, and Sarah was painting on bits of canvas from the chocolate that I'd brought up, but there was never any, that wasn't kind of like written into the time that we were spending there. It wasn't that we hadn't gone there as part of the focus, but it just became that because I mean, of course, you know, a lot of the people were naturally very creative anyway, but you kind of just also helped create an environment where that just felt totally natural to happen. And so I think there's that magic in it, is that, you know, you are a creative in every like you said, not just focused on your work, you live your life creatively. And I think that's what's so inspiring and beautiful about watching your journey, is just seeing how you approach things and how you turn things into something interesting and fascinating and just, yeah, beautiful.
That's very generous, Charles.
Not generous.
That's very sweet.
No, just
Well,
so I see it. You know, and I think it's also really brave because, you know, the way you're living your life, like I said, you know, it doesn't lend itself towards financial security and stability, because you know, it's a lot of adventure and risk and just kind of like, yeah, and saying yes to projects and thinking up new projects, and that's exciting, but it takes this particular type of personality, I think, to be able to do that.
I think now you're definitely being generous, especially with the word brave. I think it's more of a, I don't know, a naivety or a pig-headedness, like to just disregard whether something's going to be financially viable. Like I don't know, or kind of ignorance or something. I'm just like, oh yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, no, I could definitely live on about 10p a day or something like that. I mean, I don't think it's You say brave. I don't know if it counts as brave if you're just not thinking things through properly, but that's a nice way to look at it, and I'll try I'll try and look
Yeah,
at it that way.
maybe allow yourself that perspective instead. It's a bit kinder.
But going back to what you said about the chance and kind of not planning creativity and spontaneity and stuff, that it was just amazing to see everyone come out with these incredible ideas, making really, like, really beautiful things. And I think for me that's quite interesting as well, because I think perhaps because I was on such a set path to be an artist, that I find it more interesting to have that kind of spontaneous creativity
Yeah.
than to plan it, because for me, having that set path early on, art was work. Art very quickly became work and a job and deadlines and stuff like that. So I think that spontaneity is far more exciting, to get kind of creativity. I think I can't remember what her name is, not Elizabeth Day. Who was it who wrote the let's say Live, Laugh, Love?
Eat, Pray, Love.
Eat, Pray, Love, that's it. Because she writes about creativity. I can't remember what something. I think it's something to do with magic. The book.
Elizabeth Gilbert. Sorry, Elizabeth
That's
Gilbert.
it, Elizabeth
Yeah.
Gilbert. So
Yeah.
Elizabeth Gilbert wrote a book, something about the magic of creativity. I can't remember much of it.
Yeah.
I think it all went in one ear out and out the other. And she talks about creativity grabbing it as it flies past in the air, which, I mean, I don't completely agree with that. I think she is a bit kind of highfalutin about it. But I think that's quite an interesting thing when you think about like what happened in the Shants and the spontaneity of people just finding a moment and grabbing that creativity.
Yeah. Yeah, it did feel like that, definitely. And because I think everyone had probably expected to be going off, and people did do some exploring, but just so much of it just ended up centered around the bothy and building and making and baking and cooking. And yeah, it was incredible. It was quite unexpected, but really magical.
Yeah, so I find social media fascinating. I think in terms of kind of an anthropological way, it's fascinating to see how we respond to it. And I think a lot of us know that, you can curate your feed to be either healthy for you or unhealthy. And I think we all have a kind of mix of both. I find I have about a 50-50 relationship with it. Half the stuff I see inspires me and makes me feel great. And I think, gosh, I've got to share that. That's so relatable. Half of it, if I see a woman with perfectly smooth and firm thighs leaping around on a beach in a swimsuit, of course, I feel rubbish about myself. So as I'm getting older, I'm learning to kind of use it as a tool more to help me. But what I find really interesting, because you said that I'm quite I try to be quite honest on my social media and put my vulnerabilities out there, because I think for me, when I see people share their vulnerabilities and they do it with such strength, you see it's all about representation. I see someone feeling the same and I think, oh, okay, it's not just me. And then when I do it and I get feedback from people saying, oh yeah, I feel the same, kind of gives you that kind of extra strength. So I think that some people would see putting vulnerabilities out there as weak, but actually I find it as a way to kind of make them a strength in a way. And I find, especially when it comes to kind of body positivity and things like that, I mean, I know this probably sounds really silly, but it's almost like if you say, yeah, I've got a wobbly bum, like no one can come at you and go, hey, you've got a wobbly bum. You're like, yeah, I said it first. Yeah, you've got nothing on me. Like I've acknowledged it. I'm owning it. I'm accepting it. Even if you don't feel that confident about it, you're just like, yeah, I'm going to. It's almost like you're making yourself own it. So I find that quite interesting with it. But it's I mean, we're all learning, aren't we? It's such a new thing. And it's a massive part of our lives. And it's funny because, we talk about the pressures of social media and stuff like this as if it is one little entity, like one single website. No, it's everything. That's why it can be so multifaceted, I guess, why it can be good or bad, because it is everything. It's every part of our life. It's in every part of our life. But I'm definitely finding over the last couple of years, during the pandemic and lockdown, where I think my self-confidence has taken a bit of a dip. I'm definitely finding that I'm having to curate my social media a lot more, and unfollow or mute people, because I do find that, having been inside and having not been doing a lot of stuff, it's definitely harder for me to see people having these amazing holidays and spending all this money on, I don't know, like mountain trips to Fiji and spending times in like expensive tree houses and stuff. Like, I've got to be quite careful now of what makes me jealous, or I compare myself quite a lot more. So it's quite interesting seeing how the pandemic's shaped that, I guess.
It's so weird how we're all kind of just watching each other live out all the bits of the lives that we share. And I guess what's that thing is that when George Orwell wrote that those cameras would be in our homes, but what he didn't write was that we would be the ones with the cameras filming ourselves. And
so interesting. That's such an interesting point.
Like, it was through social media that I was able to start my business, and grow from there. And so it can be hugely positive, definitely. But at the same time, I'm also aware of how strange it is that I am sharing so many aspects of my life.
It's so true.
Yeah.
And what I find weird is, like, in some ways it's sinister, in some ways it's amazing that we've got that power to push ourselves without the limits of someone else kind of, owning us. You can say, right, I want to do this, and you can do it and reach the public without a kind of a middleman.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's totally sinister when you've got so many people who are putting out stuff that's not real. And
Yeah.
I don't know. And then there's the self-promotion thing. As you say, for your business, you need to show yourself, you need to be out there. And it half is great, and it's great that you can push yourself, and then it's also so unnatural to be like, hey guys, look at me, isn't this great? It's so hard. And especially, I think you and we try and present things realistically and kind of honestly, and it's so hard to kind of promote things in a way like, you want to be part of this, but at the same time you want to be honest and not make people feel bad about themselves. It's so complex. It's such a minefield of different themes and issues and things.
I think that's a really good point that you said about, in a way it's like, well, we have our own agency and we don't have to rely on somebody else, the middleman, or it being through the lens of somebody else, what they think is interesting, whereas we can actually tell our own story. And that's empowering, I suppose. And as long as we can try and be as honest, and I guess it's that you said, it's that thing, isn't it, that balance between telling your own story and being honest, and trying to be truthful, and not kind of tell a story that you feel you should be telling because that's what you see is what you think is attractive or is appealing, so you think that you need to do that. Like, for example, I used to feel really embarrassed that we have a small house, and at the time I was following a lot of interiors accounts on Instagram, and all of these houses that I was following, they just all had huge driveways and gardens and spare bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, and I was like, well, our house definitely doesn't have any of those. And I felt that I had to disguise it for a while, and then it took me, I don't know, I think it took me maybe a few months of kind of like really kind of following these accounts. I thought, but surely, like, not everybody lives in these houses, and surely there are like lots of people that live in small narrow houses, or in tiny apartments, and that's actually really unrealistic. So surely it would be far more valuable and interesting to actually just show what it's like to live in a small house, and so that other people can share their experiences of what it's like to live in a small space. And I think that's where the real value and interest and positive, I guess the positive side of social media can be, is in us sharing our stories so that we feel less lonely.
Well, it's that relatability, isn't it? And I mean, if I look at your stuff, and if I've never looked at yours and gone, oh, that's a small house, but I guess I don't follow interior stuff, so I'm maybe not seeing these huge driveways that you mentioned. But I just see that, and I just think, wow, that's so aspirational and so beautiful, and I don't know, and it's relatable because it's not some massive mansion that's had an interior designer come in for, £500,000 and put in a massive piece of artwork by Damien Hirst or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's that relatability that makes it interesting. I find it quite interesting actually how so many, I guess there's a divide on social media between aspirational and relatable, and there's a kind of a safe middle ground. But I find it really interesting that a lot of people do follow a kind of out of their means aspirational things. I find it quite interesting that people find that people follow, people who are on private jets, going on these amazing holidays, because I couldn't follow that kind of thing because it would just make me feel rubbish that I haven't got that or it's unattainable. So I find it interesting, the mentality of what
I wonder if it's
that is.
escapism, possibly, like the same kind of reason why we might watch Love Island or Selling Sunset, because it's just so far removed from any reality. It might as well be a fantasy, like a fairy tale.
That's really interesting. Do you
Yeah.
know what? That's really interesting because I started watching Selling Sunset and I couldn't watch it because I thought I could never live in those houses. I could never be as. These girls all wear white and they don't spill like ketchup on themselves. Like they're all so perfect. And I was like, I can't watch this. I just feel like a scrappy wreck. So it's interesting that you say that because it is so far removed from, well, what I know anyway.
Yeah, no, completely. I know. I've kind of tried watching them, and I think I think personally, what I find difficult is I actually find it quite upsetting watching some of those programs. I think I managed the first season of Setting Sunset, but then I went back to it and I was like, no, because like, oh, I don't know, just all of their values and priorities just feel so upsetting. And I know I shouldn't be taking it that seriously. It's fluff TV, but I guess, yeah, for me, I just get upset that that's, I don't know, where value's placed. And it's not, not where everyone places their value, but and it's cheap TV, I really probably do not need to take it so seriously and dissect it so deeply.
It's interesting, isn't it? How we each come to these things with with the binoculars of our own kind of values and our own eyes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Interesting. But I say that about Selling Sunset, but I am obsessed with Below Deck, which is the one on the boat, about mega yachts and super yachts. So I'm actually completely obsessed about that, and I would run off and live on a mega yacht if I ever could. So,
I've heard so many people talk about it. I really need to watch it.
So good. It's so bad, but again, it's total escapism. Nothing interesting happens. Same thing happens every time, but yeah.
I mean, you've experienced reality TV.
Mm-hmm.
So even the Channel 4 reality TV show, which really probably wasn't escapism watching for viewers. And then I guess you must have had some experience of the kind of the produced aspect of this, because do you want to talk about how you came to it, how it came about?
Yeah, of course. I actually quite like talking about Eden because it was such a monumental year. It's such a life-changing experience, and it's kind of gone under the radar, which is good. It meant that we avoided all the kind of scrutiny that you have nowadays, and all the trolling online and stuff. It's actually quite good that we avoided all that by not making it big.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting you say about how things are produced, because the idea behind it was that the producers wouldn't get involved. So the idea was that they wouldn't interfere and kind of tell us to do things or get involved in storylines or anything. But also that was a big issue because it meant that when things went wrong, perhaps the producer should have stepped in and said, actually, we're going to take you out of this situation because it's dangerous, or you're being threatening or bullying, we're going to take you out of the situation. And they didn't do that because they didn't want producer involvement, which led to it being quite dark in many places. But it was an interesting experience. It's something that I would love to go back and do it again. I do it completely differently.
Interesting.
But what an opportunity, it's a massive opportunity.
And what were you, when you went into it, did you have an idea? Because I guess it makes sense, like from what you've described of your army activities and that background, like out being outdoors and the practical sides of it, that would be something that you'd be interested in doing. But it was for a year that you went out, wasn't it? That's a big chunk.
Yeah, it was quite funny because so it was my boss at the time who sent me the link to apply for it, and she said, "Oh, it's this long-term kind of camping thing, whatever, living out in the woods." And I thought, okay, that's great. And then in the interview process, they said, "Oh, you do know it's for a year," and I said, "Oh my goodness, I couldn't do that. I couldn't be away for family for so long." And they said, "Well, just keep on with the process, and you might not get through." And of course, I got through. And it was a huge amount of time. And it's interesting, really, because a lot of people said, "Oh, it must have been really hard to be living outside." But I'd already lived on Skye for 2 years, so I was quite used to the environment. Living the kind of physical environmental aspect of it was really easy. Like, there are midges, it's going to be snowing, it's going to be really like horrendous weather. That bit was easy because you kind of expect it, or I expected it because I was quite lucky because I knew the environment. But it was definitely the human side and the relationship side which was hard. But it is funny looking back. I mean, we'd wake up in the mornings and our clothes would be hanging up, and they would be damp. Everything would be damp, and they'd be frozen like bits of cardboard, and you had to kind of crack them and slap them on the floor before they got soft enough to put them on.
Oh my
And
God.
I mean, things like that are just mad when you look back. But what a mad experience! It almost feels like a dream, really.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's because since when we first talked about it, because I didn't really know about it, I hadn't seen it, and then you chatted a bit about it last summer, and so when I came back, I watched a couple of episodes because it's still on 4OD. It's not called 4OD anymore, is it? Just Channel 4 online, and it I found it quite difficult to watch. I think possibly also knowing you, it was quite upsetting seeing how things unravelled and how cruel a lot of the situations were. And you'd kind of already described them, but then to watch them, it was quite a strange experience to watch somebody that you know experiencing something really upsetting. It's like it felt voyeuristic, I suppose. And I guess there's that distance, isn't it? When you're watching reality TV, it's easy to disconnect sometimes that these are actually real people experiencing something because you don't know them, you don't have a relationship, you don't have a connection with them. So to have met you first and to have heard your experience of it and then to then go and watch it felt quite vomit inducing. You know what I mean? So I can only begin to imagine how it must have actually felt to be there. And to see the optimism at the beginning and the excitement and and all the plans and to then just see parts of that fall apart, and for that to go on for a year and then
Yeah, it's mad. Sometimes my friends send me clips of one of my friends, like every Christmas, he sends me a clip of me getting drunk and having an absolute breakdown and losing my temper.
Oh my God.
Which in hindsight is kind of funny, but you just look back and you go, what did we put ourselves through? And it's interesting you talk about optimism because for some reason, like we had this blind optimism, not all of us, but a good chunk of us had this blind optimism the whole way through. And even when people were being absolute assholes, it was like, but it's okay. We can definitely make this community work. Really weird. And like even in the afterwards, we did interviews on kind of This Morning and stuff like that, and on all the kind of breakfast programs in Victoria, Derbyshire, and stuff like that. And they were like, "Oh, what about the bullying and this and this?" And for some reason, I had this like crazy loyalty where I was like, "Oh, it wasn't that bad. No, it's fine. We were just in difficult situations." And I don't know what that is, that weird, almost like mental block of, blind optimism or loyalty or something like that. Whereas now, if someone asked me, I'd be like, yeah, you were right, arsehole. And this was a problem. And this was a problem. But I don't know. I guess it's hindsight, really. Weird. So weird. Just the strangest situation. But
That's
we learned a
interesting.
lot.
Yeah, I wonder there's a lot of strength there then in community that ultimately it's like you felt a loyalty to the community that you had created, and even though it was a dysfunctional community, it was your community for that year.
Yeah,
And
I guess there's that loyalty in having a shared experience. You think, okay, well, we went through this together. We might not have got on, but we went through this together. So that'll be all right. And actually, like in hindsight, not everybody felt like that. And, I had a couple of the guys come out and do, sell stories on me and try and like bring me down and stuff. And then I was like, oh, actually, perhaps I shouldn't have had that kind of loyalty. But yeah, I guess it's in a shared experience. And I think as you might have seen, we split into two groups at the end, and it's quite interesting how we just had two completely different mindsets. And one group was, right, we're here for a year, let's use everything up, let's use all the animals up because we've got an end date. And then our group was more like, right, let's pretend we're going to be here forever, happy clappy, all kind of, we were told to make a community, let's focus on that. But perhaps in some ways that's naive, but I wonder whether, thinking about it now, I wonder whether that was just something for us to hang on to help us get through it. I don't know.
yeah.
Have a field day if you're an anthropologist looking at that.
Oh,
I feel like they missed a trick with the programming, that they didn't actually just look into the psychology of it. Like so and so is getting upset because they have no access to the food, or they've got no control over this, or it would have been quite interesting. It's interesting that it all happened before Me Too as well. I think it would have been very different afterwards. And also, there's a lot of things like there were some racial issues and some racism and homophobia that kind of got swept under the carpet and didn't get put on the screens. So it's quite interesting now looking at it through a different perspective. It was like 6 years ago. A lot has changed, and a lot has definitely become a lot more unacceptable. So it's quite interesting looking at it through a different lens now.
okay, so do you want to tell me a bit about what you're up to this year?
Yeah, so this year I'm restarting a project that I began before the pandemic. It's about traveling around the islands all around the UK, mostly Scotland, obviously, because there's loads of islands there. And I had to pause it during the pandemic because obviously these are quite vulnerable rural communities, and so it wasn't the responsible thing to do to visit them, even if I was allowed. So this year, the project is called 82 Islands, and it's to visit all of the largest islands around the UK, around Great Britain. So that's every island that's over 5 kilometres squared. And for once, Skye is actually perfectly placed. It's right in the middle of all of them. And the idea is to visit each island and kind of work out what the community and the environment needs from us as a visitor, because living on Skye, like I've got a foot in both camps. I'm basically a tourist who never left, but I'm also someone who lives there, and I see the problems of fast travel and these tick lists. Right, I'm going to see this place in a day. I'm going to rush around, or island bagging, or something like that. I mean, there's merit in it, but it also means that people don't slow down, appreciate the island, and realize that there are people who live there. So the idea is to kind of responsibly promote island travel and to show you that there's a different way of doing it.
Okay, that's lovely. So it's going to helping bring revenue into the islands, but in a way that will actually benefit them rather than just stripping them and causing problems. Yeah, that's
I yeah, I hope it will do that. I mean, obviously, any promotion of the islands is going to cause extra footfall, and for some islands that's a problem. But I think a lot of people want to be responsible visitors, but just don't know. So, for example, things like you get a lot of motorhomes and camper vans that will go to places in the Outer Hebrides, and they'll park on the machair, which is the um, kind of sandy soil where you get all these amazing little kind of meadow flowers. But that's a very delicate ecosystem. So it's about trying to kind of say, actually, try not to park here because you're gonna crush this orchid, which doesn't grow anywhere else, or something like that. So people want to do the right thing. It's just about kind of getting the education out there, and so it's quite interesting to visit different islands and work out what's important to them.
okay. So 82 islands. How much time are you allocating to each island?
So originally I was going to do it was all under my own steam. So I was fitting it. There was no real deadline because I had to kind of work and fit it in around work. Um, so I was aiming for a year or maybe 2 years. And now I've got a sponsor that I'm working with. I can't confirm it at the moment, so I can't say their name.
Mm.
But they're paying me to make videos on each island. So it's probably going to become more of a full-time thing this summer. But it's going to take a while, and it's going to be a labor of love. But I'm at least each island I'll be on for at least 2 days, because I want to spend a night there and a whole day, really, because again I want to actually, you know, make the most of being in these places. If I could spend a week there, if I could spend a month there, I would, but obviously I think it would just go on forever. But some of these places are amazing. Like, so for example, before I paused it for the pandemic, I went to a place called Ulva, which is off of Mull, and it's kind of an overlooked island. And I spoke to a couple of the people who live there, and they said that people come over on the ferry, eat a meal at the pub restaurant, which is at the ferry terminal, and then leave, and they never see this island. And I got to walk around it, and it was just the most magical island. There were deer everywhere. There were these beautiful ancient forests. There's like an old country house there. And it was just one of the most magical places I've ever been. And I think that's what's important about this project, is to show that actually, if you spend time on these islands, and if you stop or slow down, take time to look, take time to speak to the people who live there, you discover so much more, and you have such a more kind of valuable travel experience. One of the things that we haven't talked about, and I don't know if you're the same, is the value in saying no to things.
Yeah, because you mentioned that earlier about how your idea for this year was to stop saying yes.
I think, you know, when you're a freelancer, or when you do all kinds of different things, you just don't know what will be on the end of a yes, if that makes sense. Like,
Yes,
you just don't know what might be an opportunity, and what might just be someone mucking you around. So it's so difficult to decide, to kind of cherry pick what's valuable to you.
Yeah, it's a really tough one, isn't it? Because the idea of saying no is that you're allowing space, that you're not filling everything up, so you're allowing space for other things to come into your life. But at the same time, it's sometimes really hard to know whether you should say yes or say no. And I think I remember once somebody telling me that, I think the advice from their mum had been, always say yes unless there's a very good reason to say no.
Oh, blimey.
And I guess the idea being that, like you said, you just never know what's going to be at the end of that yes. But then at the same time, if you keep on saying yes, then you're overloading yourself.
I think that's absolutely terrible advice. that's the worst advice ever. But I think I saw something by Al Humphreys, and I love Al Humphreys. I think he's brilliant. And he said, if it's not a hell yes, then it should be a no, which I thought was quite a good one.
That's a really good one. That's a better one. And that's interesting, because that's an approach I generally take with clothes. Like,
interesting.
If I try something on, and if it's anything other than yes, definitely, it's like, what's the point? Because I'm never going to wear it. And I'd never thought of extending that into the rest of my life. That makes so much more sense.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like, he posted it on Twitter a few years ago, and I still think of it. I'm like, actually, yeah, that's so true. Because there's so many things, and I think you're probably the same, because you're a very kind and accommodating person. You tend to say yes, and you think, oh, this might not be good for me, but, you know, I'll help them out. I'll say yes. But again, that's not a hell yes. So
yeah.
But I thought that was a really interesting thing. And he's actually, I find him a really interesting person to talk to and to follow, in terms of trying to streamline things and to be able to say no.
Thank you so much for talking to me.
Oh, thank you so much for wanting to talk to me. Like, you know, you talk to so many interesting people. I'm like, oh, bloody hell, I'm not very exciting compared to all those people. But
and that's your totally untrue opinion. But no, I think what I have found so wonderfully enjoyable about this is just every single conversation I come away from, I'm just like, fucking hell, the world is full of incredible women. Like, you know, it's so inspiring and so exciting, and it makes me just want to do so much more and learn more and experience more and take more risks and be braver, I think. It just feels like a really lovely archive of some really lovely stories, and I'm just really happy to kind of help pull that together. So yeah.
Aww. Well, I'm so honoured to be part of it, and thank you for being patient with me for being all slow. And I'm so rubbish this year. I've got like no organisational skills. I don't know how I'm going to get any of this stuff done that I've said I'm going to get done.
You can find more about Katie's varied work online at katietunn.com and on Instagram at Katie Tunn and at Katie Tunn Art. Please refer to the show notes for links. Thank you so much for listening to On the Irregular. Please make sure you review and subscribe, as it helps other listeners find us. I promise you it makes all the difference.